Welcome to Equilibrium Echoes, the podcast where we delve into the transformative power of your inner world on your relationships. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. Join me as we unlock the secrets of emotional equilibrium and dig deep into the tools and insights needed to foster healthier, more fulfilling relationships in ways that feel safe and authentic. Welcome back to Equilibrium Echoes. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker, and today I am here with Megan Farison. I'm excited for this conversation today. Megan and I are going to dig into her story, first of all, and then we're going to talk about victim mentality and how to go through some really hard, traumatic things, but not let that derail your entire life. We're going to talk about how to own what has happened to you and heal from it and move on with your life. So Megan is a podcast host. She has a podcast called Sing, Conduct, Coach, Conduct. She is also a private voice coach, and now she is a memoir coach. She also has a coaching business to help authors write their memoir, and her business is called Give Her the Pen. So Megan, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, I can't wait to have this conversation with you. I know we connected a few days ago and you shared a little bit of your story with me, and I can't wait to share this with our listeners. So why don't you just kind of take it from here and tell us a little bit about yourself and then just jump right into your story.
Thank you. So I actually began my professional career as a public school educator. My husband and I met in college. We both were going to be band directors, and then we decided to become choir directors. So I did that for 10 years. And then I moved into music ministry for 5 years. I was the director of music and arts at a Presbyterian church in town. And then I transitioned into teaching at my home, private voice coaching. So I was still at the church. Really, this story begins back in 2019, April of 2019. And that is when my life changed dramatically. And, you know, I grew up hearing things like, your life can change in an instant. Right. And I think when we're growing up, we have all sorts of ideas about what that looks like. And I found out that that is very true, but in a way that I would have never expected to discover. So in April of 2019, I went into work one morning. My husband and I had been married for about 10 years at this point. We had our sons were young at the time, I believe around ages 8 and 5. And I went into work one morning. I was feeling really good that day. I remember that specifically. And I just thought, oh, today's going to be a really great day. I felt really motivated. And my husband showed up to work that morning, showed up to my work. He called and asked if he could visit. And again, I thought, oh, he just must be missing me. And, you know, because today's a great day, so he must be coming to see me. And when he came into my office, I knew that something was really wrong. And my first thought was that somebody had died. And so I asked, what's going on? What's wrong? And my husband said, I wanted us to be together when you saw this. And I noticed he was clutching his phone to his chest at that point. And he turned his phone around. And I felt it was the weirdest thing I've ever felt in my life, because it felt like the whole world stopped when I was looking at what he had just been looking at a moment prior. And it was the mugshot of my high school band director. And that was very traumatic for me. I hadn't thought about this man really. I mean, maybe a few times in the past decade. But for the most part, he was out of my head, you know, I hadn't thought about him. I'd forgotten sort of that he'd even existed. Mm-hmm. And then here he was in this mugshot. And I learned that he had just been arrested in Florida for child sexual abuse and pornography. Mm-hmm. And I live in Michigan. And this man had taught in Michigan for 20 years. So he had moved down to Florida in 2013. And so when this happened, it was with a victim who was in Florida. So the Michigan State Police, though, were like, well, if that happened in Florida and he taught here for 20 years, they were wanting anyone with information to come forward. So everything was very confusing. I mean, that day, I was grieving the loss of this man again that I hadn't thought about in a solid decade, really. And all of a sudden, I felt this horrible feeling like he had died. Like I felt like I was losing somebody that was very close to me, and he was dead now, and I was grieving that. And the reason that this was so devastating and important to me is because I had had a relationship with this man for 6 years. A secret relationship that lasted, started when I was age 16 and ended when I was 22. And my idea of what that relationship was, I had carried with me into adulthood. It just had solidified in my mind about what that was, and I had believed it was a certain thing. I believed I knew who this man was. And then it was like in one day, everything changed, my whole reality. And even finding out that one thing was different, it felt like everything was different at that point.
Yeah.
And so that really set me on this very different path in my life that I never would have expected. Because again, that day I felt like, okay, I just don't even feel like the same person anymore. I felt like my joy had been sucked out of me in an instant. And I did call the police because I felt like, I have information to share with them. And not realizing that when I was calling them, that I was reporting a crime as well about me. So that was also shocking, because then I also found out that I had been a victim of rape for 20 years without knowing it. So that in many ways, I mean, that just sort of blew my whole world up very quickly. And I had to learn how to navigate that. So I started going to therapy. I'd never been to therapy. And that was its own, unique experience for those, for your listeners who, I'm sure some of them have been going to therapy their whole life, but maybe some have never gone or just started. And that was like, wow, I don't even know how to be a therapy patient. Like what is, I'm going into my therapist's office thinking it feels like a weird first date, like, well, what if I don't like, what if I don't like this person, they don't like me, how do I break up with them? Like, I don't know how this works. So through the experience of working with this therapist, I discovered, like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff I have not dealt with. I had no idea. I had grown up being a very high achieving person, student first, in school. I got great grades. I graduated near the top of my class. I was the drum major of the marching band, class president. I was the commencement speaker at my high school graduation. And I think I just always thought I had my stuff together. I thought, I don't know, I knew my life wasn't perfect, but I thought I was normal. Well, maybe that's an overstatement too, but I really, I had no idea there was all this stuff going on with me personally in my life, with relationships that I didn't realize were dysfunctional. And I had allowed to be dysfunctional because it's all I knew. And so that really turned things on its head. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, I know there are probably people listening who are like, how could you not know that was an unhealthy relationship with this teacher? And, here's the thing. When you're 16, you have no frame of reference for this. And especially if you grew up not really understanding what the laws are, how things work, and also when you're 16, you think you know everything. Yep. And you think, everything that you're doing is fine. You're great. Everything feels fine. So that was a really, a huge perspective shift for you.
It is,
to
and I'm
to I mean, that really must have kind of shaken like the foundations of who you thought you were, is kind of what I hear you saying.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, and how you said that is exactly right. I mean, I couldn't put that into words at the time. I mean, I had no
Right.
idea what was happening to me. But it really did. I mean, I had tied much of who I was um, to this man in ways I hadn't realized.
Hmm.
I wanted to be a band director because of this man. I went to the university I went to because he went there. And and there were some other reasons. I mean, it wasn't the only reason, but I mean, I didn't apply to any other universities. And I think what people don't realize is that it's not just like it happens, the relationship, the physical part starts, and it's like, well, how did you not know? I think
Hmm.
it is no different than when you grow up with a parent and you just trust that that parent is a good person and an honest person, and my parent loves me, and whatever way your parent treats you, you think that's normal, right? You
Right.
normalize that.
Right.
So, I mean, I met this man when I was right on the cusp of my 14th birthday. He had come to audition eighth graders for the high school bands, and I really liked him right away. And he was very nice. There was nothing creepy. I think also people think, right, like, oh, these predators, you can really tell that they are. And it's like, well, maybe sometimes, but a lot of times these people are very charming, and they fit into society very well. And this man in particular was a very successful band director in the state of Michigan. He led a state organization as the president for a while. So I inherently trusted this man right away.
Hmm.
And then over the course of my freshman year, and I liked how I felt around him. And we call this the grooming process. Again, things I had
Right.
no idea about, Alyssa. Like, I
Right.
mean, I didn't know what grooming was before April of 2019. I just didn't know,
Yeah.
because I inherently believed, I just believed people were good. I grew up, I know you and I had talked about this, but I grew up in an evangelical church. And I grew up believing people were fundamentally, they were sinful, right? But they were good people who maybe sinned or made mistakes, but I felt most people were like me on the inside. I knew I made mistakes. I could have never imagined that there were human beings in the world who would seek to harm you or to manipulate you. And so
Yeah.
by the time that this physical relationship had started, he had groomed me so successfully that he controlled my reality and how I saw him. So when he took that relationship to a physical level, the only thing I could think or see was, this man loves me clearly. Why would
Yeah.
he be risking his job? And I didn't even think risking his freedom, because I didn't know it was a crime. I just thought it was taboo.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
growing up in the early 2000s, there were a lot of things that were acceptable that should not have
Hmm.
been. And we're much more aware now. But that's why, and I'm just really glad you brought that up, because I do think it's hard for people who have never been in this situation to understand that. And that's when I say to them, well, think about any other kind of relationship where you thought it was one thing, right? And then at some point you
Hmm.
realize it isn't, or that person isn't who you thought they were.
Right.
And imagine this is a person who is a caretaker. But it's such a betrayal when it's a parent, um, parent, teacher, pastor, doctor, anyone who's supposed to, you inherently trust because they're supposed to be caring for you. For
Right.
that person to be manipulating you and lying to you to get something from you, it's inconceivable.
Yeah, especially when you're young, because you don't have the life experience um, to help you filter what's going on. So your husband, he came and gave you this news. You went to the police, and how did things kind of unfold from there?
Well, the police told me that I had two options as far as how to proceed. That I could pursue a civil lawsuit against him, which again, I was like, well, what does that mean? It's a weird thing when you've never sat in a police station and you're finding out all these things when you're 33 years old for the first time, because you're sitting there talking to this sergeant about these personal experiences and these memories you have that you don't see as being a crime, that
Right.
you see as being romantic or kind or, all the things that you felt when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so they told me that that was one option. And I told them that I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to hurt him or take anything from him. I assumed that he had very little left after being arrested in Florida, and he was released. I mean, after that, he bonded out and was free while he was awaiting whatever, trial or court hearings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I said I don't want to take whatever he has left. And thinking back to my childhood, my mom's voice kept playing in my head, like, we don't sue people. That message, I don't know if you ever experienced anything like that growing up, but or your listeners, but it was this mentality of, yeah, like bad things are going to happen in life, but we don't retaliate. You know, we don't, that was seen as an aggressive move towards somebody else or that hurting somebody, right? Rather than holding them accountable for what they have done to you. Um, and so I said no. And then they said the other option was to pursue, is for the state to pursue a criminal investigation against him. But they needed to check on the statute of limitations. So because it had been so long before I had reported it, the physical abuse started in 2001 and legally ended in 2003, even though relationship did not end until 2007. But that was the cutoff because I turned 18 years old, which I find is, there's so many things that I've thought about that I would have never had to, like, well, why does it just stop being abuse because I turned 18? It's still, you set it up, right? You set up that relationship and then you get to reap the benefits of that abusive relationship for however long the victim, until the victim can get out, hopefully. So I said, that's fine because I just wanted to do the right thing. I did not want to hurt him. I was very confused. I did not believe I was a victim. So I knew I was telling the truth about the things that had happened. And I was hearing what people were saying. Like logically, I knew he had committed a crime at this point. But in my head, I was like, no, that's not true. Like this man loved me. This man cared about me. He was kind. And I thought he was kind because, he never yelled at me. He never physically, what I saw as being physical abuse, right? He never hit me, pushed me. He was always very, what I thought to be a gentle person. And so, but even then I said, you know what though? That deepest part of me was like, you need to let the police do what they need to do though, because the victims in Florida, victims, however many there were, I felt like I needed to be there for them. I needed to let the system know, hey, this man has done this before, right? Regardless
Yeah.
of what I felt about him or the way that I perceived our relationship, I still felt like the right thing to do was to tell the truth and then to let the police do their work. And so while that was going on, I was struggling. I mean, in this way, I had never struggled in my life. So the investigation is happening, and they did come back and say, well, it meets the statute of limitations, which means we can proceed with your permission because you're going to be the sole witness. And they ended up telling me that I was the only victim to come forward in Michigan. And I was shocked. My husband said, there's no way you're going to be the only one. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, yeah, you're right. And when I find out I'm not the only one, that will prove to me that I was not special. That will prove to me that I was not loved. So then when the sergeant told me, you're the only one, that solidified the belief I had always had about my relationship with this man. And so I gave permission to continue with the investigation. And while the investigation went on for 5-6 months, it was 5 months, I believe, total, things were very difficult in my personal life. I was struggling every day. I was just in survival mode every moment of every day. And what I didn't understand was that I can identify now is that I was suffering from severe PTSD. All I knew at the time was that I could not live in the present at all. finding out about this man's arrest and then feeling like he had died and that I was grieving him. It's like when you lose a loved one and then all of a sudden all you can think about are the best memories. And a lot of, well, you go to a funeral and all of a sudden everyone's talking about the best things about this person, right? It's like they are amplified into this. There's, memorialized as their best qualities in many cases. And that's what happened with this man, is that in my mind, I was grieving his death of who I thought he was. And my body and mind's way of dealing with that was to revert to the past and to be stuck in these memories where I would play these scenes again and again, searching for clues that he was really this terrible human being and finding nothing. Because how I experienced them as a young person, I could not all of a sudden insert new feelings into those memories. Yeah. So I was really, really struggling at that point in my life.
Yeah, because I mean, it's so disorienting. Like you're kind of living with two different realities at that point. Your lived experience, which was very real to you, and this new reality that everybody is telling you about, like, that you've kind of been shoved into. And that's no small thing. So what happened next? You were waiting on the investigation and really struggling. And how did you kind of start to come out of that?
Well, not easily. It got really dark before it got better, I believed with all my heart that they were going to arrest him. And this was a really weird, complicated thing for me because I didn't want them to hurt him. I didn't want him I didn't want to cause him pain. I didn't want to harm him. But then there was also this feeling of like, well, if they arrest him, I started having these thoughts. Like, if they arrest him, they'll bring him back to Michigan. And then I'm going to get to know the answers. They're going to put him on the witness stand on the stand. And then he's going to have to answer, for why he did this. And so in my mind, I thought, I'm going to get closure. My whole life, I'd always felt like I could deal with whatever had happened in my life. I mean, my life certainly has not been perfect by any means. I've had struggles, but I just always knew how to take care of it. I knew how to be positive about it. And I knew how to say, but God's got a plan, right? And this was the first time in my life where I was like, I don't know how this is going to turn out, because there was no future that I could imagine at that time where I was happy again. I just felt it was so weird. I felt like I was never going to be happy again. Even though I was surrounded with a wonderful, loving husband and wonderful children. I mean, here I was with this great life in front of me, and I couldn't connect with it at all. Yeah. And that was devastating. And I did everything I could do. I mean, I journaled. I went to therapy every week. I was watching videos. I went to my therapy session, my second therapy session, I believe, my second or third therapy session. My therapist had asked me to write a letter to my abuser. And I'll just call him that now. I didn't call him that then, but that's what I'll call him for this purposes of this. And through that, I wrote him this letter, and there were a lot of feelings in it that when I got to the end of it, she said to me, "Do you know what Stockholm Syndrome is?" And it was one of those things that I had heard at some point in my life, but I didn't know what that was. And she said, well, it's basically when a victim attaches and bonds with their abuser, and they can feel loyalty, defensiveness, they can even feel love for that person. So she very gently said, why don't you do some research on that when you get home? Like, just tell me what you think. Just tell me what you think. So that's what I did. I went home, and I felt like a detective the whole time. Like, I'm just like digging into my past. I'm going through these clues. I'm like learning what's grooming, what counts as sexual assault. My husband is, he was so patient and while suffering inside himself, watching me, trying to convince me this wasn't love. This isn't romantic. He wasn't kind to you. A kind person wouldn't do this. And I just could not accept any of that. So it was just a constant trying to figure out, how do I keep moving forward? And it was messy. I want to be very, very upfront and honest that, you can be fighting these battles, and just because someone says to you the right answer, if you're not ready to hear that because you're traumatized or you haven't processed that reality, it doesn't matter what someone says to you. You have to figure that out yourself. And you can only do it in whatever time you need to do that. So what ended up happening in the end was they found out after they had completed the investigation, they had enough evidence to arrest him. In fact, they had even gone down to Florida and they had interviewed him. And I remember before they went, the sergeant saying to me, he doesn't need to talk to us. Like, he is not obligated to talk to us. So we could get down there and he could just ignore us. And, we can walk away with nothing. But this man chose to talk to the police. And so that in itself is very interesting. And that was not a healthy thing for me, because he acknowledged we had a relationship to the police, but he lied about the timeline and basically said that our physical relationship had started in college, and then he backpedaled and said some other things. And I mean, it was just, but he had an agenda clearly for talking to the police. I don't, no one will ever really know, but he chose to do it. So, they had enough evidence to say, you know what, we can arrest him. And then they found out like last minute in the last step that it actually did not meet the statute of limitations. So the Larry Nassar trial in 2018 had brought about these changes with the statute of limitations because, he had abused over 100 of these female athletes, and they could not do anything about this. So, I mean, it was a huge thing. And what was really weird is Netflix, a documentary about this very thing came out right around the same time that all of this was happening. So it was very odd. My husband had actually watched it to try to understand what I was feeling about it and why it was so difficult for me to just say, well, I was abused and that's it, and I get it now. And but that wasn't that case. So because that happened in 2018, the law didn't change until that time. My abuse fell under the old law. The time window of my abuse ending in 2003, it ended, so 10 years later. So we were outside of the window. And so they get to this point. I was like thinking this is going to happen. I thought there's going to be an end to this, right? I'm going to get closure. I had all of this built up in my head about how once this happens, then, even if there was a trial, this would move toward me getting answers and knowing, and understanding so that I could move on with my life and feel like myself again. And I kept thinking, I just want to go back to my old life, right? I mean, not realizing that's never going to happen. Right. That's over now. And now you have to navigate this new life. And so when I found out that he was not being arrested, that was very devastating. And what I will say, because I've actually written a memoir that's going to come out in November, and that details this whole story. So I'm not going to share everything here, but what I will say is that my life got even darker after that. And just to the point that my whole life was pretty close to being destroyed. And it took everything, that I had to pull myself out of it. And I would not have been able to do it without the love. Really, my husband is at the top of this list. I really think he's a hero in this story, because he was able to love me through a very destructive time. And that got me just one step further. And I just, every day, I just had to keep going. And then I started making some changes in my life because of that, because I knew, you have to change. I started seeing in myself where all of these cracks were, in my past, and these things that I had not dealt with and that were invading my present life. And they were potentially, ultimately, could destroy what I have, and the life that I had built with my family and my job. So one of those things was that I realized that I had a substance abuse issue with alcohol. I did not, it didn't even occur to me, or I didn't even realize that this was a problem. I had grown so accustomed to drinking every day, that I just thought it was normal. I mean, a lot of people drink every day, right? You know, it's like, yeah, we're living in America. That's what we do, right? Or, I guess they say, people in France drink every day too, but I guess it had normalized, much like relationships in your young years, you normalize. This had become normalized in my life. And I had to face it, because I realized that part of what was destroying me in relation to my abuser and that situation was, tied to addiction in a very strong way. So when we talk about trauma bonds, you had said that in our pre-meeting, you had mentioned how trauma bonds are so difficult, because you feel chemically bonded to a person. You feel like you need them to survive. And it is very much like an addiction. And you feel, and just like any addiction, you can give up everything for that one thing.
Yes.
And I realized that is what was happening to me. And so I started my journey, my sobriety journey in 2021. That's when I actually got really, really serious about it and said, you really need to make a change now.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that strikes me as you're talking about that is, so often I think addiction, we sort of have this misconception, I think, in society, where we look at addiction and we think, oh, well, their problem was that they took the first drink. They tried drugs for the first time, and then it just grew and they just couldn't escape it. But there's so much more to it than that. And very often I think addiction is rooted in a completely traumatized and overwhelmed nervous system that is just trying to find a way to cope. And you were not in a place yet where you could even process that or begin working on your healing journey. And yet your body and your nervous system were like screaming for a way to cope. And that's where I think addiction is so, it just sneaks in, because it's just so subtle sometimes. And but that's what it's our body trying to take care of us. It's our body saying we need some help here, and we're going to find it however we can. And I think we misunderstand that about addiction. But anyway, that's not the purpose of this conversation. I just wanted to throw that in there. But so I wanted to go back a little bit. You were talking about when you believed that he was going to be arrested. And really, you said what you were really anticipating was that would somehow end in closure for you. And so do you feel like you ever got closure, or did you feel like at some point you just had to go, okay, I need to move on and heal, even if I never get the closure I would like to have? Like, what did that look like for you?
So in seeking closure, I mean, eventually I had to create my own closure, but I had never had to do that before. So before I had to create my own, before I realized there was no somebody else creating it for me, right? Because I believed that the answer was with this man, was with this abuser, that he held the answers, and I needed him to give me those answers. And I had built up these ideas about what that would look like. And so what I learned about myself is that I did not have good coping mechanisms ever in my life. Like you had talked about coping, right? Our body, like addiction, in so many ways, is our body working exactly the way it should be working. We blame people instead of blaming all the things that led them there, right? And in the end, it's not that it doesn't matter, but regardless of you making bad decisions because you were traumatized, because you're addicted to something, you still make those choices that hurt people. And you have to take responsibility for that, even though you can say, I know why I did that. I know why I made the choices that really didn't even feel like choices back then, too. But I know why I went down the paths that I did to try to gain closure or to try to get answers, because I just wanted to be free from the pain I was in. I was miserable and grief-stricken and lonely, and I thought, this isn't working. Whatever I'm doing right now, I'm journaling, I'm doing all the right things, right? And this is not working. Right. And so I started to get more desperate for what would work. And one of the reasons that these relationships are so terrible, and I really do tie addiction back to this as well, is that when you experience something as a young person that you should not experience, some artificial fear high. I mean, in my case, mine had to do more with, there was fear, I guess, attached to, hiding, right? The secrecy of being with this man. But I didn't see it as being fear. I saw that was just part of the deal, right? Is that we had to sneak around, but it was the high I got being with him. It was the artificial high I got being physically involved with him, because it's very different being having interactions with a full adult man than it is a boy your own age. And so once your brain experiences that, right, that artificial sort of high or what have you, it craves that again and again and again. And so when I was young, I fulfilled that by having more physical interactions with boys. I sought out opportunities to feel needed and loved. And because I tied all that into my worth, right, is that I needed to feel that high, that passion that I had felt. And then when I got married, or even, it was even before I got married, I started drinking. I waited until I was like 21. It's not that I had never drank before, but I was like, I'm going to wait, as much as I can. And then when I started doing that, I realized, oh, I can get an artificial high from this. You know what I mean? My body was like, we like this. This feels safe. This feels good. And so that's how you sort of go down that path. I know that you were talking about closure. It's like I'm trying to trace back, what was the original question that Alyssa asked me? Because I think it was about closure, but then maybe we moved on to the addiction. So you'll have to remind me again.
That's okay. Yeah, I was just asking, like, you were waiting for this closure when he was arrested and this trial that you hoped was going to happen or you thought would happen. So how did you get to a place where you were like, okay, like I may never get this kind of closure that I think I need, but I can make my own closure and move on. Start healing. I don't mean move on as in like it's all over, but like start to begin to heal.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that I could offer to your listeners, your watchers, some like happy fairy tale of like, well, I woke up one day and I looked at the sunshine and like I just realized life should be better. And, but again, I did not have coping mechanisms, and I was very traumatized by the whole thing, and I had not even been able to feel the trauma of what that man had done to me. It had changed me as a young person, and it had instilled ideas about relationships that were unhealthy, right? That I didn't have to see this person a lot to still believe they loved me and cared about me, that I could see them occasionally, but because it kept going. So, the truth is I had to hit rock bottom, Yeah. And that is, I wish that had not happened. And I had to get to the point where I almost lost everything in order to realize that what I had believed was true really wasn't, because much like a drug, you want it so badly and your body says, I need this to survive. But then the part of you that's in there, like deep in there, that isn't the traumatized part. It's like the core of who you are is screaming, this is killing us.
Right.
It's just screaming for help, like help us, help us. And I needed help. Um, and until I got help, until someone on the outside recognized how bad this really was and how much help I really needed to get out of it, um, it seemed nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't do this alone. And I feel like now I think about people who go through terrible things and have to try to pull themselves out of it and get closure, and they don't have the support system to do it. And then society blames them for not being strong enough, not being
Yeah.
smart enough, not being, and that is just, it's so wrong. It's just not
Yes.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. So you hit rock bottom, and what you didn't do, clearly, is choose to just stay there and wallow. Like you reached a point where you were like, okay, like I have to get my life back. I don't want to lose everything that I hold dear, like you said earlier. And so talk about that a little bit, because sometimes it's so easy, I think, for us to experience these huge traumatic events and just live there.
Mm.
And we do need to live there for a while, obviously, because we need to grieve and we need to process that. But what was that like for you to get to that point where you're like, okay, like I either have to pull it together or I'm going to lose everything and everything that I hold dear? Like, what happened? What was that shift for you?
So for whatever reason, I don't know if it was that I grew up in a church or because I felt loved as a child. I mean, I thought I was so lucky because my parents were divorced and they had remarried. So I had four parents. I thought, oh my gosh, this is the greatest. I get two Christmases and two birthdays. And I don't know, I grew up with this sense that the world was for me. I don't know, like, like that it was on my side. It wasn't against me. Even when something bad would happen, I had a way, and I will say this, I've always seen, call them signs, whatever you want, but I've always thought, I've looked at the world in sort of this way that God is always talking to us. And when I say God, I mean, however your listeners, however you want to perceive that word, right? What that means to you. But that I've always had this feeling that there is something greater than myself out
Mm-hmm.
there. And not only, it's not just a feeling, I see it in my life, because I pay attention. I pay attention to little moments, that maybe some people don't pay attention to, just little things that maybe seem insignificant. I don't believe in I do not believe in coincidences. So, but I'm not going to act like I know I have any real answers, because I don't think any of us know for sure, right? But I know that when I look at my own life, I can zoom out on it and I can see all these moments where even when things didn't look good, even when something bad happened or things didn't go the way I wanted them to, that ultimately God was able to take that and use it for good. And I don't think God does that alone. I mean, you have to put in that work, right? You have to say, okay, so I've always had this faith, right? This sense of faith and hope inside me that even when things are dark, that there is light somewhere, and that some of the most powerful, good, positive things that have happened in history have come out of some of the worst, most terrible, darkest moments in history. And so I see that on my little, microscopic level of here's just me and my little world, and I see it on a grand scale. And that's just because I think I choose to see those things. I've always felt that way. So um, even when things were very, very bad, I kept fighting. I kept digging, like for that deepest part of me that was saying, you can do this. there's something beyond this. Your story is not over here. This isn't where it ends. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Because I could look around me and I could see the good that was still in my life. I could look at my husband who was so desperately trying to save me from myself. And I could say, how grateful am I to have this person in my life? And I can look at my children and I can say, wow, they are real examples of love. They don't want anything. I have one teenager and one that's almost a teenager. They want a lot from me, but they love me. They love me because I'm their mom, and that's real love. And the more that I could put that up against this other thing that I thought was love, the more that I could see that this wasn't love at all, that this was never love. This is not what love looks like. It's because I confused love with this intensity. I confused love with intensity. I thought, well, I have these feelings when I'm with this person, and I thought that they had that for me, and that's love. And it took me until I was in my 30s to really understand what was a healthy relationship and what real love really does look like in the flesh, not just like, Jesus loves me, Jesus died for our sins, like that kind of, that sort of far away, it's true, or things like that. But that you have people in front of you who are not giving up on you, even though they could. And you say to them, I would get it if you did. Like, I would literally say to my husband, I understand if you think this is too much, and I would not blame you if you decided that it was. And he didn't give up. And so I've just always, I don't know, I've been grateful to have enough good things in my life that when things were bad, I still had faith that there was more good to come.
Yeah. So looking back now, I think it goes without saying that trauma and traumatic experiences like this change us, right? And I'm sure you would say you're a different person now, having walked through that experience. But tell us what it looks like on this side. Like, when you look back now, like, what are some specific things that you can now appreciate, even if maybe you're not joyful or great, like maybe not totally with joy, but at least you're like, I can see where that has really helped me grow and change.
One of the greatest things I learned from my first therapist. So I'm my therapist who was with me through the bulk of this. I have another therapist now, but both wonderful women. Something she taught me, I think about all the time, and that's, you can hold two things to be true at the same time, even if they contradict each other.
Yes.
That was so helpful for me, because I could say to myself, I really wish that this didn't happen. These things. I really wish that these things had never happened. And at the same time, I can be grateful for who I am today because these things happened.
Yes. Yes.
So it's being able to hold all those contradictory things at the same time that I don't think I ever really knew how to do. I had no one tell me that. I mean, I didn't have the education, right? Like, no one had ever said to me, you can do that. It was pick one or the other, and I grew up thinking, have no regrets. And now I think, oh, you can absolutely, I think it's healthy to have regrets, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can say I have regrets, but I don't regret my life.
Yes.
Like, yeah. I wish I could, some of those things wouldn't have happened, or I wish I could have done them differently, but I can accept that they happened. It's that radical acceptance. That was another thing I learned about in therapy, was radical acceptance that they did happen. And, you can wallow in that about all the sad things. And sometimes, you know what? It's okay to do that. I still can go down that path and feel sad, but then you get yourself up, and you say, but look at all that, look at everything I learned from that.
Yeah.
And nothing is guaranteed, there are people out there that may think, well, my life's never going to get better. Well, it's 100% true that it won't, if you're doing everything to sabotage it,
Yes.
So you have nothing, I mean, you can have that attitude and and feel miserable about it. Or you can take the chance that something good might happen if you have that
Mm-hmm.
attitude. And
Yeah.
even while I say that, I want to acknowledge that it is a privilege to be able to say that, because just to say, well, don't be so negative, you know, I don't, it's a privilege for me to feel the way that I do and to be where I am now, you know, having written a book and now I'm starting this memoir coaching business to help other women tell their stories. I feel very privileged to be in that position because there are people that are so buried under trauma and don't have the support system that they are not able to get themselves out of it. And I would pray that those people find what they need to get out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it is. And I think that's a really good point is we're all starting from different places. We all have different support networks. And sometimes the most we can do is get out of bed. And if that's where you are, that's okay. But I think the underlying message here is keep moving forward. Don't stay there. If all you can do is an inch at a time, you're eventually going to find yourself 3 feet down the road, 6 feet down. Like those inches add up over time, those baby steps. And, I tell clients, I just told someone this last night. She was like, I'm not making any progress. I'm not making any progress. And I said, it's because you're looking at this staircase of 100 steps. And
mhm.
since we've been working together, you're 5 steps up, and that is not no progress. Like, just because from where you're standing, it still looks like this enormous staircase you have to climb, doesn't mean you haven't made progress. Like, take a minute, look back down, and realize I'm 5 steps up this 100-step staircase, and take a minute to celebrate that because even if you fall back 3 steps, you're still 2 steps above where you
Yep.
started, right? And we get so caught up in like this, it's not going to be better until I get to the top. I'm going to feel, and that's actually not how it works. Every step gets you 1 step closer, and every step is worth celebrating.
Hmm.
So what would you say, what would you like to leave listeners with today as kind of a final thought?
Um, I don't, just the word gratitude keeps coming back into my head. Um, to find things to be grateful for, again, I can only speak from my own experience, and I can be there for other people who are going through hard times, and I can show them love and give them a safe space because I really think that our world needs that right now. I think that people are carrying shame and secrets and things that they blame themselves for, and they're isolated. And if they could let other people in and receive love and support, then I think that they would realize that they don't have to stay in that shame, I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
world, it heaps a lot of trauma onto us, and then we end up reacting to it because it's normal to react to it. And then the world blames us for that. So then we bury it and we hide it and we don't deal with it. And then we end up passing it on to somebody else, or at the very least, not contributing to the world in a way that we could be to make it acceptable for other people to come out and say, hey, like this happened to me, or I did this because this happened, or whatever. And again, when you say, I did this because this happened, you're not saying, don't blame me, I'm not responsible, because you can hold both of those things at the same time. You can
Yes.
say, I did this horrible thing, or this thing happened because of these things, and I still accept responsibility. And my way of doing that is to not hide from it, is to say, I'm going to face it. I'm going to talk about it because I really feel like I'm on this earth now. I have purpose to help other people and to love other people who are dealing with difficult things and feel lost, because that was the gift that was given to me when I was in a really dark place.
Love that. Thank you for being here with us, Megan, sharing your story. And tell us where people can find you online, how they can connect with you and learn more about your book.
Oh, sure. Okay. So my book is going to be released November 25th of this year, and it will be on Amazon. And I'm still learning all like the publishing stuff, but it will be available through my website, meganfarison.com. You'll know, be able to go there and find links to that. I have a Facebook and an Instagram. And then of course, Give Her the Pen is really the big thing right now, where that we're working on launching that. So we have an Instagram and I know they call it X now, we still call it Twitter, but
Yes.
yep, Facebook page and all that. So either you're looking for Megan Farison or you're looking for Give Her the Pen, and it's pretty easy to find me. And I look forward to anyone who maybe connects with this story and wants to share something with me. I also created a Facebook group for it's called Hope for Survivors of Educator Sexual Misconduct and Trauma. And so that is a group of people who either know someone who's been victimized in this way or people who have been, and we've been able to connect with each other, and it's been so healing. And so please connect if that's what you need. And yep, I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm just so thankful that you invited me to do this. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. I will put all of Megan's links in the show notes, so click down below and connect with her. I encourage you to do that in whatever way is right for you and your circumstances. So thank you so much, Megan, and thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on Equilibrium Echoes.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Equilibrium Echoes. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit www.coachingwithalyssa.com/podcast. And while you're there, book your free consultation and download the preview of my new book, Marriage is Hard and Other Lies I Believed. I'll see you in the next episode.